Good evening. Two very different policies, both meant to show the world how much the modern Conservative Party has changed. A brand new railway line instead of a new airport runway, and giving gay couples the right to marry. Both policies are still officially on track, but many Westminster watchers here think one or both might bite the dust. 30 years after Mrs Thatcher said she was not for turning, is this becoming the age of the U-turn?
As the Chancellor said recently, if there's one thing worse than a government that listens, it's a government that doesn't listen.
So they've U-turned on the pasty tax, on the caravan tax and the changes to charitable giving, and Tory backbenchers seem delighted.
This is parliamentary democracy at work. It is because members of this House argued strongly for changes in the budget that they've occurred.
It is great that we finally have a government that listens and doesn't plough on regardless.
So, who will the government listen to next? Perhaps those people in Oxfordshire and Buckinghamshire and all along the route who say the new high-speed rail line from London to Birmingham is an environmental disaster and a catastrophic waste of money. A previously suppressed report by the Department of Transport has recently been published, which suggests the economic benefits of the new line have been exaggerated. And politically, it's damaging the Tories in the south, where UKIP are campaigning strongly against HS2, and it doesn't seem to be doing much good for them up north either. But just yesterday, the Prime Minister seemed still committed to the project.
I believe we should go ahead with HS2. I think it's very important for the economy of our country. I think it's very important we get on board this high-speed rail revolution.
All this as the aviation industry lobbies furiously for extra runway capacity in the southeast. HS2, of course, was supposed to mean that wouldn't be needed. Joining us now, Steve Brine, who is the Conservative MP for Winchester, Caroline Lucas, the Green Party leader for now, and the MP for Brighton Pavilion, and Lord Knight, Jim Knight, the former Labour MP for South Dorset. Let's start with you, Steve Brine. Is this becoming the age of the U-turn?
It seems that way, doesn't it? I think it's quite worrying, really. I mean, you know, the lady said she wasn't for turning. If you look at the budget, though, I mean, look at the overall number of measures in the budget, you know, some 500 or so measures. You know, the things that have been U-turned on are tiny, you know, 4 or 5 items. Am I pleased that the government listened on charitable donations? A lot of people wrote to me about that. Am I pleased they listened on VAT of listed buildings? You know, when you represent Winchester Cathedral, you certainly listen to those arguments. Shouldn't they have seen these things coming before they announced the budget? Well, to be fair to them, and this sort of gets to the heart of what is a budget these days, doesn't it? Because a lot of these things were actually consultations that were announced in the budget. They weren't actually policies that were announced and voted on after the budget and then U-turned on. They were consultations. So, you know, the charitable giving was exactly that. And they actually listened, and then they made a better decision in the long run. Okay. And I'm all for better decisions in the long run. OK, let's move on to the two issues we were discussing in the film there, Caroline Lucas. Let's start with the railway, HS2.
The ludicrousness.
Oh, go on then. You can have a quick comeback at that, Jim Knight. Go on. I know you're dying to go.
I applaud him for, you know, a good effort, but in the end, you know, these measures have been kicking around the Treasury for years, and previously, whichever government has been able to stop them getting onto the table before the budget is announced, and it just looks a shambles. It looks incompetent.
Well, since we're all having a go, yes, nice fancy footwork, but essentially I think it does show the incompetence of the Chancellor, and frankly, if there is a U-turn that's needed, it's away from this incredibly damaging austerity. I wish he'd kind of listen to the public about that, because that is really decimating the lives of many people. OK, we'll talk more about that later in the programme. Let's talk first of all about this railway, HS2, Caroline Lucas. Now, lots of people might think you're the Green Party leader, you're all in favour of projects like this, but you're not, are you? Well, we're certainly in favour of investment in public transport. I think the big question about HS2 is how many people benefit from it, what's the environmental impact of it, and indeed what's the impact when you look at it from a progressive point of view. Is it, you know, your ordinary people who are able to benefit from this, or is it basically business people who will just have a whizzier way to get to work? I want to see 32 billion spent on things like a real local transport infrastructure, affordable housing, actually quite a few other things one might spend 32 billion on right now. That's not to say we're against all high-speed rail forever, but the arguments, first of all, from the economic point of view, don't stack up. Secondly, the argument that this is going to mean that we're going to divert people away from aviation. If that were true, I'd be delighted, but the evidence suggests that actually what happens is that the slots that are freed up in the airports simply then get used to do other journeys. It doesn't reduce net aviation, which is what we need to do for climate purposes. So I fear that this is a bit of a white elephant. It's going to be hugely environmentally damaging, and there's a much better use of 32 billion. And it's a project that has its genesis in the Labour government's days, Jim Knight. Are you an enthusiastic supporter?
I am. I've seen in Kent the effect of the high-speed rail through the Medway towns and on down to the Channel Tunnel. I think the rest of the country should be able to benefit from that sort of service. We see that service elsewhere in Europe. So, you know, ever since Andrew Adonis first presented it to us in Cabinet, and I remember that very well, I've been very enthusiastic about it and being able to connect up the rest of the country to the south east.
Domestic services in Kent that use the high-speed line are, of course, a premium service. It costs more than ordinary rail fares. It's partly Caroline's argument that it becomes a rich person's form of transport.
And that's a choice people make, but I know a lot of people...
if you're not rich, is it?
No,
that's absolutely a ridiculous argument. The point is there are a lot of people waiting on coal stations for hours.
The extra cost of doing it is a cost that students... You know, my son goes to University of Kent and Canterbury. They use the service because they, you know, and they pay the extra £5 each way in order to be able to get into London quickly.
Lucky if they can do that. Those kids that might have now had their educational maintenance allowance taken away will not be able to spend an extra £5 as if it's nothing for that kind of rail fare. You know, this is a real issue of equalities, and I think that it is a rich man's toy.
Steve Brine, do you think the government are going to climb down on HS2 or U-turn on it?
Possibly.
Would you shed many tears?
No. I mean, it's hardly the biggest issue in my postbag in Winchester, let's be honest. I mean, you know, if you represent Winchester, what we're concerned about is the throat into Waterloo and the problems that causes for my constituents, which is that there isn't enough capacity.
And that's the argument, isn't it? We should be spending this £32 billion on things like that.
Well, yeah, you know, and if it costs more to buy a season ticket from Winchester into London Waterloo than it does from Southampton, which is closer to London, you know, there are all sorts of crazy things. £32 billion is an awful lot of money. I think when the Transport Secretary sort of reaffirmed this policy in the House of Commons earlier this year, and John Redwood, MP for Wokingham, asked her a question, you know, how much money has the government set aside for this in the current plans, and what contracts have been let? And the answer was pretty little and none. And, you know, I think that maybe tells you a little something about this. I tend to agree with Caroline. I think it is a bit of a white elephant. And although the Prime Minister sounded still supportive of the policy yesterday when asked by a Northern MP...
Well, he said we should build it. He didn't say we will build it. He said we should build it.
Exactly. And I think what he's talking about is the values, the aspiration that he has to have first-class, what he would consider to be world-class transport
But you think
links.
it might get scrapped?
But as a Hampshire MP, what do I think of world-class transport links? What will affect me every day when I'm commuting to London and my constituents every day into London is the ability to actually get a seat and sit down when you're coming from Winchester into London Waterloo.
OK.